Good evening, sir. I am Mylene Tian, and tonight I will be discussing on how to locate core, delta, and the 8 general type of fingerprint pattern. Let's discuss first on how to locate the core. So there are 4 rules on how to locate the core. The first rule is the core is placed upon or within the innermost sufficient recurve. This rule establishes that the core, or the central element or point of focus, should be positioned either directly on top of or inside the innermost recurve that is sufficient. A sufficient recurve likely refers to a specific type of shape or structure that is considered adequate to hold the core position. The innermost part means it should be the closest or the most internal recurve relative to other elements. The second rule is when the innermost sufficient recurve contains ending ridges or rod rising as high as the shoulder of the loop further from the delta. The exemption to this rule is when both shoulders are equidistant to the center of the sufficient recurve. If the innermost recurve has ending ridges or rods that extend to the same height as the shoulder of the loop that furthers from the delta, or another reference point or boundary, the core should follow these guidelines. The exemption occurs if both shoulders of the loops are equidistant from the center of the sufficient recurve. In simpler terms, if the shoulders are the same distance away from the center, the typical rule doesn't apply and the core's placement might differ. Rule number 3 is when the innermost sufficient recurve contains an even number of rod rising as high as the shoulders. The core is placed upon the end of the center rod whether it touches the looping ridge or not. When there is an odd number of rods in the innermost recurve, all rising to the same height as the shoulders, the core is placed at the end of the middle rod, or the center rod. It doesn't matter whether the core touches the looping ridge or not. The placement is determined by this central rod. The rule focuses on the odd-numbered rods and the importance of the central one for the core positioning. And the last rule is when the innermost sufficient recurve contain an even number of rods rising as high as the shoulders, the core is placed upon the end of the further one of the two center rods. The two rods being treated as tuft, they were connected by a recurving ridge. In cases where there are an even number of rods in the innermost recurve or all rising to the height of the shoulders, the core is placed at the end of the farther of the two middle rods. These two rods are treated as if they are connected by a recurving ridge, possibly meaning the placement considers their relatives' position as a unit. The key distinction here is that the further rod from the center is chosen when there are an even number of rods. So let's move forward in rules in delta location when there is a choice between two or more delta. The first rule is the delta may be located at the bifurcation which is open towards the core. A bifurcation is where one ridge splits into two. This rule says that a valid delta can be located at a bifurcation only if it opens in the direction of the core or the central part of the fingerprint pattern. The second rule is when there is a choice between a bifurcation and another type of delta, equally close to the point of divergence, the bifurcation is selected. If two possible delta points are equally close, one is a bifurcation and the other one is another ridge formation, or like a dot or an ending ridge, then always pick the bifurcation. The rule number 3 is when there is a series of bifurcation opening towards the core at the point of divergence of two type lines, the bifurcation nearest to the core is chosen as the delta. If there are multiple bifurcations that all open toward the core, choose the one that is closest to the core as the delta. The fourth rule is the delta may not be located in the middle of the ridge running between the type lines toward the core but at the nearer end only. The location of delta depends entirely upon the point of origin of the ridge between the type lines towards the core. If there is a ridge between the two type lines, you can place the delta in the middle of that ridge. Instead, you must place it at the end closer to the core based on where that ridge starts. And the last rule is if the ridge enters the pattern area from the point below the divergent type lines, the delta must be located at the end nearer to the core. If a ridge comes upward in the pattern area from below the point where the type line split, the delta is located at the end of the ridge closest to the core, or it is called the inner terminus. So the last discussion is all about the 8 general types of fingerprint patterns. So locating and identifying the 8 general types of fingerprint patterns involves careful observation of the ridges, cores, deltas, and flow of the lines. Fingerprints are usually classified into 3 major groups, which are the loops, whorls, arches, and arches. But from this, 8 specific patterns emerge. So the first pattern is the radial loop. Derive its name from the radius bone of the forearm. It is one type of fingerprint pattern in which the ridges run its direction to the radius bone. The second pattern is the ulnar loop. Ulnar loop is one type of fingerprint pattern in which the ridges flow toward the ulnar bone or little finger. Ulnar loop, therefore, it derives its name from the ulnar bone of the forearm or little finger. Letter U in classification purposes. But take note, a pattern to be a loop must have the following 4 essential requisites. The first requisite is it must have a core, it must have a delta, an imaginary line must pass between the core and the delta, and lastly, it must have a ridge count of the minimum of at least 1. The third pattern is the plain whorl. It is a fingerprint pattern which there are 2 deltas and in which at least one ridge make a turn through one complete circuit. An imaginary line drawn between the 2 deltas and must touch or cross at least one of the circuiting whorl ridges within the pattern area. Fourth pattern is the central pocket loop whorl. It's symbolized by letter C in the classification. It is a fingerprint pattern which for the most part of the loop, but which has a small whorl inside the loop ridges, sometimes called a composite pattern, which means that it is made up of 2 patterns in one, a whorl inside a loop. It has 2 deltas, one of which appear as the edge of the pattern area, as a plain loop, and one show inside the pattern area just below the counterpart ridges. The double loop whorl. It's symbolized by letter D in the classification. A double loop whorl is a pattern consisting of 2 separate and distinct loop formation. One of the loops surrounds or overlaps the other, also called composite pattern. Like the central pocket loop whorl, it arises from the fact that this pattern are composite or a combination of 2 patterns in one, with 2 core and 2 deltas. Accidental whorl, symbolized by letter X in the classification. It is a pattern which is a combination of 2 or more different types of pattern except in the plain arc. It is a pattern which is a combination of 2 or more different types of pattern except in the plain arc. It can be a combination of a loop or whorl, a loop and a central pocket loop whorl, or any combination of 2 or more different loops and whorl type patterns. Plain arc. It is a fingerprint pattern in which the ridges enter on one side of the pattern and flow towards the other side with a rise at the center with not more than one of the 4 essential requisites for loop pattern and with no recurving ridge, no angular formation, and no upward thrust. Take note, it enters to the left and flow towards the right. So the last pattern is the tented arc chest. Symbolized by letter T in the classification, it is a variety of arc family, but the ridge formation are not simple as those of the plain arc. Also consider transitional pattern between a plain arc and a loop. Generally speaking, tented arches are formed in any of this 3-way formation. First is one or several ridges in the center of the form up and upthrust. Second is the ridge or ridges in the center form as well-defined angle. And lastly, the pattern may have 2 or 3 or 4 essential requisites of a loop pattern.